And welcome everyone. This is 157A and Madeline, I'm going to kick it off to you.
Yay. Hi, everybody. We're going to not forget to look at the appearance of the wine. But before I do that, we always put up these questions, things for you to consider. Because sometimes, especially if, well, not just if you're not super practiced at this, but anytime, let's say your brain's not moving quickly, you might have something to hang your hat on. And these are three things I just put up there as a general consideration to check out. How you would quantify and qualify the acidity in this wine. Quantify means, medium minus, medium plus, high. Qualify is more touchy-feely, smooth, rounded, integrated, crisp, verby, mouth-watering. You can throw your adjectives on qualify. Non-fruit aromas, often, especially in deductive reasoning process, are the punchline. So what are we talking about? Floral, herbal, spice, organic and inorganic earth, oak, etc. And there's earth rearing its head. Inorganic meaning rocks. I like to make a little joke of inorganic minerality in white wine. I call it white wine with rocks because it does. It comes across like wet. Take your pick. Limestone, slate, etc. And organic has to do with the earth, just the way it sounds, forest floor, leaves, etc. So that said, let's start with the appearance on wine number one, white surface, wine on an angle. And then all of a sudden, it's not just white. In this particular case, I would say it is straw. Depending on your light, you could say a very pale yellow, but to me, it's straw. And it's got some green glints to it. It moves in the glass quickly, and it tears quickly as well. So it appears, at least visually, to be medium light-bodied, TBD as we taste along. And I like to remind everyone of Tim's incomparable comment when we're blind tasting. There's a part of you that's desperate to know what the wine is. You don't want to hang your hat on the appearance. You want to use the appearance a little later to reset yourself or to, push along the deductive conclusions you're coming to. So aromatically, this wine is forthcoming. I would call it both gentle and defined. It's very pretty, and I don't have to fight for it. Immediately, I get a wave of sweet citrus, like very ripe lemon, more Meyer lemonish. I had to go buy a Meyer lemon. People were using that term so often, I'd never met one. And mandarin, tangerine, and a little bit of an orange character to it. There's tree fruit for sure, and it's crisp tree fruit. So, green pear, green apple, like you just cut open a Granny Smith. Maybe a little bit of stone fruit, like white peach or not quite ripe nectarine. I find there's a tropical element to this that I like a lot. It's pineapple, but not, canned or super ripe pineapple. I guess if we were being a little precious, we'd say pineapple core, right? So the essence of pineapple, just a little bit underripe. But, I should have mentioned this before. To me, right on the heels of the citrus fruit aromatics is a beautiful florality of citrus blossom. So lime blossom, lemon blossom, a little bit of, tree fruit blossom, like apple blossom. It's so pretty. Herbs, there's a little bit of a green character to it that I think ties into citrus again, maybe lemongrass, sorrel, verbena. I get the rockiness on the nose, like wet rock or slate. And I'm curious to see how prominent that's going to be on the palate. At least on the nose, there's less than no presence of oak on this wine, not even a whisper of possibly large used, etc. The aroma is driven by sweet citrus, fresh, pretty citrus flowers, inorganic earth, and I can't wait to taste it. So here we go. There's also a leasiness to this wine. we're pushing slightly ahead because we haven't tasted it yet. So hold your
Sorry,
thought before you
that
start
was
eating this.
that was
That's
that was a
okay.
quick
You can
mouse. Yeah.
stare at it, but maybe it'll
Yep.
help you. What strikes me immediately is it wakes me up. It's got shockingly attractive but punchy acidity, right? So high acidity, super mouth-watering. I'm going to go back to it so my palate adjusts to it. Sometimes that first hit is almost unnaturally pushy or dramatic. It's high, but it's delish, and it completely ties in to the sweet citrus element with maybe a little bit more lime tone. Alcohol, very interesting. I can barely perceive it. It's so balanced, I don't catch any in my chest. Medium, one could even make a comment for medium minus. There is such a freshness to this wine. There is an impression of, and it could be an illusion, of captured carbon dioxide, like almost a spritz, or maybe an actual spritz. Just super fresh, lean and tart in the most attractive way, because both those adjectives sound a little bit austere. Again, driven by citrus, which turns more tart on the palate, more into real lime and lemon. There's the green apple and the green pear. Definitely, you know, not ripe peach, but maybe a little white peach. Tropical fruit for sure. There's that pineapple core, fresh flowers, you're chewing on them, a little bit of lemongrass, and maybe in terms of spice, a little bit of ginger powder. Tons of inorganic minerality on the palate. You know, I call it white wine with rocks. And there it is, however you want to define it, rocky, chalky. It's got a salinity to it, if you want to define it that way as well, like you're just standing on the beach, smelling with your mouth open. Oak aging, less than none. I would bet big bucks on that. Teeny little bit of a phenolic effect, but it's not a big element in this wine. Fresh, cleansing. Let's see what our options are. Let's see if I can pronounce this. Handarabi Tutti blend, because generally that grape, which is grown in northern Spain and Basque Country, has a little like 5 to 10% of other stuff in there as well. Pinot Gris or Grigio, which we famously know if you're in MS tasting channels at any level as you know, non-aromatic or very lightly aromatic white grape that's grown hither and thither, but notably in northeastern Italy and Alsace and Oregon, and can often be confused with Chardonnay and Riesling, which also often, well, routinely has acidity that is compelling, right? But a very specific set of aromatics. So you might want to ask yourself if they're presenting themselves here. And our regions, France, which we mentioned for Pinot Gris, also for Riesling, Spain for Handarabi. I hope somebody's from the Basque Country out there and can correct my pronunciation. I'm pretending it's Greek. Then we've got New Zealand and Oregon from what I still insist on calling the New World because it's familiar to me and I like the term. For certainly Riesling and Pinot Gris. So, and other,
Okay.
and by the way, here's the thing with other, please, if you think it's other, don't be shy. We're not going to call you wrong if you say it. Nobody's going to call you anything. They're going to be happy that you are specific what you think it is in the chat room. Sorry, I interrupted you, Lee.
No, sorry. First of all, sorry about my trigger finger here. I did not mean to push it forward, but I see that people have been very hesitant and very slow to call on wine number one. Guys, it is anonymous, the poll. We don't know who says what unless you put it out there on chat, which we encourage you to. But
and you're helping one another.
Exactly. So, and if it's the first time you're seeing Handarabi, hey, it's totally cool. Not the name of a car. And if you've never seen it before, that's what you're here for. Master the World is here to share some really exciting things as well. So, you know, seeing new words on the screen is totally fine. So don't be afraid, totally anonymous. Let's not make this first wine an example of how every single poll is going to run from here today. So answer, and we're going to just give people another 5 seconds, and then we're going to close this one down.
Somebody said what rules out Milan, as in Muscadet? Nothing. Good other option. Bravo, especially if we're talking about acidity, and also it's leesy, correct? You know, I don't think lees dries this, but it's definitely an undercurrent. And this specific wine, I will tell you, has seen significant lees contact.
Great. All right, I'm going to end the poll, and I'm going to see where people are at. Maybe people like to pick the unfamiliar, Maddie.
Well, there we go. So I'm gonna get the car thing out of my head now. You're talking to a Detroiter. Ravi Tsuri leads with Pinot Gris on its heels, then Riesling, and then other. And I think we're talking about well, certainly Milan has been mentioned, and Tim and Evan, if you can keep an eye on the chat room while I keep following what's on the screen, that would be very cool indeed. And somebody in a very pithy way said that they are inching towards Hundarabi because of high acidity, low alcohol, and citrus fruit. Okie dokie, yeah. That sounds like deductive reasoning to me.
There's a question here. What takes us away from Riesling?
I think Riesling to me is a highly aromatic grape variety that would have the presence possibly in many cases of a little TDN, the petrol factor, would have a strong presence of stone fruit, equal florality, and depending on where it's grown, could match the acidity and the modest alcohol, you know, unless it's ripe and vinified in a Trocken style. So to me, Riesling is a very strong option. Just consider the specific aromatics.
Mm-hmm. And Maddie, as I go to the next screen, do you want to answer what takes us away from Pinot Grigio?
Sure. You know, if I were to mention anything taking us away from Grigio that we haven't concluded yet, though we're getting on our little plane, please remember I am always in an aisle seat, preferably in business class. I know that's, you know, a princess thing to do, but I get on these long flights, I like getting up and down a lot. Pinot Gris, Pinot Grigio, I think the acidity would not be as compelling. It would be more medium plus. I think that we would have more gentle expression of tree fruit, certainly pear apple, and more in the red apple, golden apple zone or Basque pear. We are indeed in northern Spain. We are basically a stone's throw from San Sebastian on the coast. We are 27 miles southeast of San Sebastian. We are in an area where people drink tons of chocolate, which is what this is. And is it Getariaco Chacolina, Evan? Hopefully I said it correctly. But I'm just, as I said, pretending it's Greek because there are 3 zones of Chacolina, and this is the one that's closest to San Sebastian on the east. We have significant maritime influence. You're right there where the bay is located, you know, and Bordeaux is just to the northeast. And but you also have a significant amount of rain. So the grape variety is Hondarabi Tsuri. The larger region is Basque Country. And Getariaco, though I'm probably slaughtering it, Chacolina is the smaller region. If those of you who are going for certifications are having a panic attack, like, oh my God, is this allowable on advanced? We don't always just do, you know, testable, allowable varieties. I think one of the coolest things about Master of the World is that we pick wines that are exciting and great examples of type, whether they're considered classic or not. This producer, Ignazio Uruzzola, has been around since, I think, the 14th century. So we're talking 11, 12 generations. And I think this is a terrific example of the style of chocolate that's widely enjoyed with the broadest range of cuisine. Evan wanted us to come up with summer foods that would be great with our wines. And you're talking to, you know, peasant Greek girl here. So tzatziki, for sure, right? Slathered over anything. But more than that, I remember coming home for lunch and getting what are called barbuña or little barbuña, barbunaca, which are like baby smelt that are deep fried, and just you squeeze a lot of lemon on them. And what happens when acid meets acid? It makes the wine taste softer. Can we get the next slide?
There's a follow-up question from Mary asking again, what took it away from Pinot Gris? Could you just summarize what exactly?
Sure, I'm happy to. I think the acidity is too compelling. I think the florality is prominent. And the alcohol is, this one is around 11%. Generally, the levels are more sort of 13.5 if you're, or even higher if you're in Trentino Alto Adige, or definitely in Alsace. The mouthfeel is different. The mouthfeel of this wine is very specific and very much driven by the modest alcohol and high acidity. And the aromatics are very much driven by sweet citrus and flowers. I think Pinot Gris is a little bit more neutral, and it sort of hugs lees slash tree fruit, ripe golden and red pear and apple. In terms of how this is natural yeast fermented. It is aged on the lees for a couple, 3 months, no batonnage. It is grown, by the way, at over 1,000 feet in altitude, which is really cool. And by the way, regarding this lovely grape variety, Handarabi, Tsuri means white in Basque. There's a red version as well. It is usually in this area blended with 5 to 10% of one of two other grapes, Kubu and Crouchen. So it's often compared, or I think Evan mentioned, it's almost genetically related to one of them. So there's a little bit of confusion in terms of what's what, but one thing that's not confusing at all is that this is the white grape in Chocolate. Pergola training is common in this area, and I love seeing these historic regions with modern architecture, don't you? Gentlemen, did I miss anything seminal to this wine?
Tim?
No, I don't think so. That's a great call. The questions about Pinot Grigio. If you think about Pinot Grigio, it's a very restrained expression of white wine. And Maddie, to your point, it's got the tree fruit and the citrus fruit. It's got mineral. It's got leaves. It's got a little bit of phenolics. Of the alcohol compared to this wine is like a laser beam.
Right.
It's got really high acid, some phenolics, very mineral driven. Even smells like Visine. And not a lot of fruit, and the alcohol, I have it as 10.5 on our bottle. So yeah,
we have a question here on pH and TA. Evan, do you know?
No, but if it's important, somebody could look it up. I'm sure it's available online. It's on the
Sternick website, by the way.
Yeah,
that's a chemist question. Yeah.
Yeah, we're doing that, but not to de-emphasize that. Obviously, particularly if you're a winemaker, figures like that are fast and furiously important. But for our figures from today, or our discussion today, we didn't track it down. So
I did have one question, Maddie. The pergola, it's set really high, these vines. Is there something significant about how high these are away from the ground?
It could be that how we're seeing. I don't think they're growing anything underneath them here the way they do in some other countries. But the punchline with pergola, or in this case, they're called para in this area of the world, is that you get circulation, air circulation, correct? And especially if you're dealing, you've got that beautiful maritime influence, but if you've got significant rainfall, you want to dry it out, correct? And it's also a historic way of training vines in this area. But, the takeaway from this makes great wine by the glass in the summertime. You could probably drink a dangerous amount of it and not pay any attention to the 2, 3, 4 glasses you just downed. But super cleansing, and it is a quintessential Basque quaff.
Great, excellent.
Yeah,
all right.
As we move to wine two, just a couple of closing. It's always difficult to follow Madeline. She is so reflective and spot on, precise. and delightful and far more eloquent than me. So it's always a bit of a push. But a couple of thoughts on Chacolí in general. If anybody does find themselves in the Basque Country, that could be in Biarritz on the French side, it could be in San Sebastian on the so-called Spanish Basque side, it could be in Bilbao as you're going to the Guggenheim Museum or whatever. This is, to Madeline's point, a coif of the region. And I say coif in the most admirable of terms, which is to say you don't have to overthink it, you don't have to do it, you just enjoy it. And as you're literally walking down the streets of old San Sebastian, where there are no cars allowed, and you're just ping-ponging back and forth between tapas bar to tapas bar to tapas bar, or as they call them locally, pincho. That's the term in the Basque Country there. This is the wine that if you just ask for quote unquote a glass of wine, you're going to get. And it goes so well with so many different sorts of things. Summer fare, light fare, delightful fare, fare in general. Chacolí. Discovery wine for many of you today, but for people who are wine drinkers, this really should be considered along with Albarino or Verdejo or Pinot Grigio, just sort of a nice, easy beginning of the meal type wine. So le voilà. All right, with that, let's move on to wine number 2. And as always, take your wine, look at it against your white background and make sure I'm not holding it too high or too low there, and reflect across the color. If you hold a wine like that, it's going to look like looking at the room on Romper Room. It's not going to help you too much. So here, the color is sort of a nice sort of basically, again, a pale straw color, perhaps just a kiss more pigmentation than Madeline's wine, but not dramatically different. There is also a little bit of a green tinge there. And as I swirl my wine around, I'm noticing, again, presuming a clean glass, at the highest point that the wine reaches, I'm looking at the speed at which the tears form and fall down the inside of the glass. And here they're sort of in a moderate stage. And there's a lot, even if you will, of sort of sheeting action, which suggests to me that either one, my glass isn't very clean, but probably more likely just that it's not a super duper high alcohol wine, or you'd be getting a thicker and slower formation of the tears. Off to the nose, which is where all of the generosity of the wine is going to be. I always look for a few terms. As people know, few stands for fruit, for earth, and for wood. And if you can address those elements of wine, you're going to be an expert in the eyes of everybody with whom you know. And as you think about this in the context of the questions there, the color, generally the lighter the color is going to usually reflect to cooler climate, or perhaps a lifestyle choice such as using wood or not. Wood will always add color to a wine, particularly if it's smaller, and any techniques such as wood aging. What non-fruit aromas that maybe we have here? Think about that as we go through, and what does the structure suggest when we actually get here? So right off the bat, I am driven by elements of what I call fruit. And fruit to me, I'm using sort of generically that anything that grows out of the ground. So not only actual fruit, but here I'm sort of lumping this in with vegetables, with herbs, with flowers, so just sort of organic things all put under fruit. Here I get citrus. It's a little sharper in its citrus presentation than Madeline's wine had. So while there is sort of tart lemon fruit and lime fruit, there's maybe even a little bit of pith on this, as well as the flesh and the rind of the wine. There's even a little bit of, dare I say, something even more intense, like kumquat or something there. As I move into other elements there, what kind of fruit am I getting? I saw Kevin just pop up passion fruit, and he must be a lip reader because or a mind reader, because I was going to say that. Not only is there sort of a passion fruit, but there's a little bit of what they would call a gooseberry type character for those of you who've had before, and another sort of underlying character of tropicality, maybe a soft element of lychee, but it would really be Veronica in the back, but not a bad call. Then I am hit with this wave of what I would say is green, the green wave. Not, and if you're from Tulane, you would know what a green wave is. But if you're not a Tulanean, you won't know what a green wave is. That's their thing. And I'm getting salad greens. I'm getting a little bit of spring peas. I'm getting a little bit of cucumber. I'm getting a very soft amount of bell pepper. And then right behind that, maybe a bit of ginger, maybe a bit of cilantro, a little bit of verbena, maybe a bit of sorrel. So definitely the sort of green thing with that tropical fruit, with that citrus fruit. That's kind of like the holy triangle here for me. Not getting anything that suggests too much earthiness there. Maybe there's a little bit of mineral there, but it's not its driving character. There's certainly not a lot of potting soil or organic earth there. And as I alluded to before, because you haven't heard me say anything about it, nothing that suggests oak. And if there is oak, it's large oak, it's old oak, it's huge oak, but I'm not really getting anything that suggests it to me. Maybe there is a soft amount of leasiness here that's giving me a little bit of that kind of pine nut character in the wine, but that's different than oak itself. In the mouth, ooh, another bright wine. I would call this wine definitely refreshing, zesty, and zipping. Maybe not as tartar control as the first wine we had that Madeline had that literally ripped it off of your gums and the sides of your mouth. But this is nevertheless sort of medium plus, pushing higher acid. It's got a little bit more weight and richness to it, which suggests that the alcohol is perhaps higher than the first wine we had. And if Tim said our first wine was at 10.5%, maybe this one's more like 12-ish, 13 in there, but certainly not more generous than that. The texture of it is lean, it's bright, it's tart. The finish is long, but not purely electric and acidic. And it's expansive in the back and sort of reflective and echoing a lot of the elements of fruit that we talked about, the green elements, the herbal elements. Maybe there's a little bit of blossom there, like citrus blossom as well. And again, sort of these kind of herb flowers, things like that. Wildflowers are in there too. Delightful. And
Evan, Maria had a starfruit comment that would kind of go in line with your tropical.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, starfruit is a tropical fruit, and definitely starfruit would hit right on in there. So a brilliant comment. And that's the beauty of wine is, one person's starfruit is another person's, unripe kiwi fruit is another person's, green melon is another person's this, but very, very astute. And as long as we're not going blackberry and blueberry here, we're in pretty good shape. Choices of grapes. Well, we have Torrentes. That's the national white grape of our friends down in Argentina. As we know, if you've had Torrentes before, it's sort of like a collision into a fruit market and a flower market all in one. So ask yourself, does this wine have that? Albarino, similar along the lines of what we talked about before with Madeline's Chacolly, but maybe a little bit more stone fruited in nature. Sauvignon Blanc or a blend. We've had Sauvignon Blanc before, be it from Chile or be it from France or be it from California or a number of other places. Again, oftentimes a lot of combinations of citrus fruit. The quality of citrus fruit changing depending on how warm the climate is, and other elements of greens and florals and stuff like that. If there's something else there that speaks to you. And then, of course, our pushes on grapes, Spain and Portugal for our friends in Albarino, and a little bit of Sauvignon Blanc, I might add too. Argentina for our Torrentes, New Zealand, certainly for Albarino and for Sauvignon Blanc, and then other.
Here's the question, Evan. Do you feel like the color is helping you go away from Albarino? Maria says that Albarino usually has a deeper golden color. Do you agree with that?
It depends. Two things would give you color. Three things actually could give you color in Albarino. Number one would certainly be age. An older Albarino would pick up color as the color in time oxidizes. It's kind of like when you cut an apple or a banana and leave it on your counter and it goes from being a beautiful color to turning brown over time. Wine does that in a much more decelerated state. So an older Albarino would give you darker color, although I still wouldn't call this wine as being quote unquote dark color. The two other things that you could do with Albarino, one, probably the most likely culprit would be skin contact. Oftentimes they will leave the wine in cold contact with the skins before they allow the fermentation to start, giving it what they would call sort of a 24-hour or even just several hour cold soak before they raise the temperature, and there's the situation's allowing for alcoholic fermentation. That would be the second reason. And the third reason would be oak. I would probably steer away from the oak. I didn't see anything there. The wine comes off as being too fresh and too bright to be having developed color. And there's not a lot of color in this wine. So it fits within the safety zone of some skin contact on Albarino. So I wouldn't write Albarino off. I mean, there's a lot of elements there that could be there. But again, I think just pay attention to the back. What are the other flavors that you have there, as noted by our third varietal, that are not necessarily associated with Albarino? Albarino is usually very heavy on the stone fruit, the nectarines, the peaches, and the sort of more exuberant floral character. And this wine, if anything, is really more a two-note song between sort of the green characters and, again, those citrus characters. So 2/3 of us are in the land of Sauvignon Blanc, not quite lifted and terpenic enough and floral enough to be Torrentes, and probably splitting the middle between Albarino, which is where you ended up. Most people thought it was Kiwi land, And if you're familiar with Kiwis, Sauvignon Blancs, oftentimes they do very much demonstrate that sort of passion fruitish, gooseberry, elderflowery type character, which we might have here. So let's see if we're actually right.
And
As
it's also very clear, Evan, that 76% are voting for non-Europe. So flavors are bold, sort of
Absolutely,
in that
yeah,
vein.
yeah, very much so, and it's driven by that, again, depending on how we encapsulate it, fruit character, which in non-European or New World wines, however you choose to express it, that will usually be the driving thing. It's also a little bit riper, and the acid, while medium plus, is certainly not as bright as the wine we had, which suggests riper fruit, which would mean diminished acid to begin with. So here we are going down under. We're waving at the West Island, that place they called Australia, and going to our friends on the North and South Island, specifically or on the South Island to the area of Marlborough. Yes, indeed, Bill, passing past Dubai. I always never look at the screen because these things actually give me like vertigo and motion sickness. So we're going to end up at Dog Point Vineyard. Dog Point Vineyard is a fab property. It's located in the Marlborough area and is essentially anchored off of a single vineyard property called the Sutherland vineyards itself, of which they have land in, they have vineyards, plural. So they have land in the Omaka Springs area, which is a little bit further away from the southern valleys, and then vineyards in the southern Wairau in an area called the Brancott Valley, which is essentially where we're pointing to on the map there. We're sort of right there at the Brancott Valley, just in the southern part of the Wairau. And Omaka would be even sort of further south and slightly east of where we are in the southern valleys. This is a killer property. By the way, this is a property itself that is the largest organic operation in New Zealand. And when you think about that for a minute, I mean, that sort of makes sense. That's kind of cool. But think about how cool it is down there. Think about how wet it can be down there. And although Marlborough is certainly the sunniest part of New Zealand wine country, nevertheless, that's a big undertaking to go organic and then to be certified, which means you're spending a lot of money with third parties doing it. This is a property that goes back to the 1970s, which is when Ivan and Mary Sutherland established it. You probably won't know them, but their partner in crime is a gentleman by the name of James Healy, who with his partner in crime at the time, Kevin Judd, were the folks that established Cloudy Bay, probably one of the most iconic producers of Sauvignon Blanc in New Zealand and in Marlborough. Ivan and Mary were investors to a small degree, but more importantly, they provided grapes to that. The Healys and the Sutherlands kept in touch over time, even when Cloudy Bay sold off, which it did years later. Corporately, they stayed together. And in 2002, they started to sort of think about it. 2004, they put out their first vintage of wine. Average vine age here is about 25 years old, which is why I think you get a little bit more depth and richness than your typical Kiwi Sauvignon Blanc. It's got a little bit more depth, a little bit more character, a little bit more, dare I say, gravitas to it. But nevertheless, all of the signatures of a Kiwi Sauvignon Blanc are there. I would simply say that Dog Point, because I'm never going to ask what that is, Dog Point refers to the fact that this particular area used to be, as so much of New Zealand is, a lot of sheep back in the day. And we know that when sheep are running around, what do you need to get them back in the pen? You need dogs, and you need dogs to shepherd the things back. In this particular area around the vineyard, around where the winery is actually located, was an area that was known to be, how do we say this, where the dogs went wild and claimed a territory of their own. And when they finally got rid of them years later, in reference to that, they called it Dog Point. So yeah, West, that's the way it works. But James Healy, one of the great wine people of New Zealand and really one of the pioneers in Sauvignon Blanc. So this is the Sutherland family. That's Ivan and his wife Mary to his left, and then the younger generation that's actually really running the winery now today, still working with James and his wife. Good example of Kiwi Sauvignon Blanc.
Awesome.
All right. We're to wine number 3. Hey, everybody. And let's take a look at our questions first. First of all, what does the wine's color, number 3, suggest about its age and winemaking techniques? And Evan pointed out some salient details about what impacts color in white wines, those being age, lees contact, use of oak, or what else? Maybe botrytis, okay? And then the second question, what are the important non-fruit aromas and flavors? And that is always important. In fact, I use that question every time I edit these. And so we'll look for that, all the non-fruit type things. And then finally, I'll ask you to think about the structure. So alcohol level and acidity level here, okay? And with that, let's do a little visual aids and let's check out the color, right? This is show and tell, everybody. I'm gonna hold it up here. Here we go. This is great. All right. So first thing we notice that the wine is clear. So it's probably been fined and filtered to a degree. This is not strong like the first two wines. This is definitely yellow. I'd call this a medium yellow. It still has a touch of green in it, which means relatively speaking, it's probably young, maybe grapes grown in a cool climate. We don't have any kind of sediment like tartrates floating around. And in terms of legs, tears, Marangoni effect, etc., it's a solid medium plus. It's not high, but the tears set up fairly quickly and they come down fairly quickly. Okay, on to the nose. Everybody please smell the wine. Wow, okay. That smells yummy. I know that's not a technical term, but it smells yummy, okay? And let's examine why. First of all, there's a lot going on here, okay? Even with just the fruit, there's a lot going on. And so I'll start with citrus fruit. And here it's pretty much sweeter versus tartar citrus. So to me, this is Meyer lemon, maybe a little bit of key lime, possibly mandarin. And we're talking about the flesh and maybe the peel. And it's pretty fresh, okay? There's also some very ripe tree fruit, that being apple and pear. So I would say there's things like yellow apple, maybe a touch of green, but it's pretty ripe. There's also some Asian pear, maybe some green pear. And here it's a mix of kind of like fresh and ripe, but also just a little bit baked. So again, pointing to the deeper color. So maybe a couple of years of age on here. Other fruits, there's definitely tropical fruit here. So there's pineapple, there's some melon. I would say there's green melon, maybe some orange melon too. And it's all fresh, okay? And then next up, we're headed to non-fruit. There's a touch of floral above the glass, kind of like citrus blossoms, and they're fresh. And there's some very vague, I don't know if you want to call them herbal, especially after tasting New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, but they're botanical herbal type notes. So there's lemon verbena and what else? Some lemongrass maybe. There's also a little bit of spice. There's ginger root. And in terms of oak aging, well, first, before I get to that, so I'm going to say there's a touch of earth here and mineral. But again, if you want a reality check, go back and taste the chocolate, and that will set you straight, right? Because by comparison, the earth here is kind of very gentle turn soil, and that's about it, okay? But there is oak presence on here, and that makes itself known in the form of there's vanilla, there's spices, there's caramel, there's butterscotch. But the interesting thing about here is, having said all that, there's like a nuttiness to it, a little bit of oxidation from the oak. It is really integrated beautifully into the wine. So usually when you have that much oak influence, it tends and it can dominate the wine. Here, not the case. It's kind of melded into the overall profile of the wine really beautifully, okay? And then there's some winemaking things we need to point out. There's a little buttercream, butterscotch thing going on, and to me, that's malolactic. There's also what I would call creme fraiche, almost cottage cheese, and that's Lee's contact, okay? So all of a sudden, we've got the holy trinity of ML, malolactic, Lee's contact, and oak together. Keep that in mind when casting your vote. Let's taste it. All right, that's just as delicious as it smells. Okay, there again, it's seamless. A lot of fruit up front. There was a touch of mineral in the mid palate that I didn't see coming. And the wine really brightens up. There's more acidity here than I thought there would be. It's at least medium plus. It's certainly not high like the first wine. The alcohol is also medium plus. Again, you get this combination of all these, the fruit together, it turns tartar mid palate, and then the oak is there kind of like holding it all together. Really beautiful balance on the wine. The finish is long and the complexity is medium plus plus. The wine is dry, of course. And wow, that's really good winemaking. Okay, with that, let's see our ballot. Okay, so we have Chardonnay here. Okay, we have Chenin Blanc, which sometimes could see a little bit of oak, but maybe have higher acid, maybe even more mineral driven. And then finally, certainly one of Madeline's and my favorite white wines, Assyrtiko, which I always get dangerously excited. But that, to me, Assyrtiko, especially in Greece, is grown in places that has volcanic minerality. It can get fairly ripe like this wine, have really high acid, and pronounced, considerable, and even profound volcanic minerality. Okay, your regions: Greece for Assyrtiko, France for Chardonnay or Chenin Blanc, South Africa for Chenin Blanc, and California for actually all three. Because there's bound to be somebody making Assyrtiko in California. Evan, you would know.
Yeah, Tim. So Kevin's got a comment here about bitterness or bitiness. Do you see either of those?
For me, not so much, especially so Kevin, go back and taste one for a little palate course correction. This to me has, maybe the combination of the lift of acidity and the oak together can give the impression of bitterness. That sometimes happens. And Judy says maybe nuttiness. Judy, absolutely right. That's the oak on this. Yeah. And I think it's delightful.
The mouthfeel is really nice, isn't it? It's
it's just seamless and creamy and yummy. It's good.
10 more seconds, people.
So,
Get them in. Oh, you're on mute.
I was going to say, get ready. November is coming. Start practicing.
That's right. Got to vote.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, here we
So
go.
let's jump on Evan's private jet.
Oh, let me just show the
And
results. Let me just show the results.
Okay.
We're at 79% Chardonnay, 16% Chenin, and 5% Assyrtiko. And of course, correspondingly, we are about 21% in Europe, but the rest of it mostly in California. So any thoughts before we jump?
No, let's get on Evan's plane, open the champagne, and go.
I think that your comment about Greece and Assyrtiko may have caused a jumping of ship
Some
here.
consternation. Sorry about that. Okay.
All
All right.
here we
So
go.
we're gonna hop on the plane, and it's gonna be definitely an overnighter. And that's right. We're gonna take have some champagne and a snack, and we're gonna take a long nap.
3 bottles of chocolate, Tim.
At least. All right. And we're going to fly back to California wine country. And this time we're going to go to Lake County. And I think this is a winery and, owners and a set of guys that all three of us are big fans of. In fact, we've used their Cabernet before. Huge fan. So we're going to go to Lake County and we're going to the Obsidian Wine Company. And this is their Chardonnay Poseidon Vineyard 2022. And the fruit is actually not from Lake County, but it's from the family's original vineyard, which is in Carneros on the Napa side. And Nicholas Molnar planted in 1973. And literally, there was probably nothing else for vineyard going on at the time. Because even when I moved to San Francisco in 84, there wasn't much in Carneros, and there wouldn't be for at least 10 years. It was considered too cold and windy. But for several decades, Nicholas and family, they sold Pinot Noir and Chardonnay to sparkling wine producers, in the valley and beyond. Okay. So Poseidon Vineyard, Obsidian, of course, is in Lake County. And today it's Michael Tyrion and it's Peter and Arpad Molnar. I met all of them and did a project with them. They are great guys. I just have to think that this is an absolutely distinct terroir for California. I mean, they literally planted a vineyard, some years later on top of a volcano. And so there's just huge chunks of obsidian in the soil, which hence the name. This particular Chardonnay, though, that vineyard again was planted in 73, replanted in 1997. It's a Davis clone, G4 is what it's called. Here, though, and I'm going to turn it over to Madeline in a second because she's interviewed these guys a couple of times and knows them better than me. But they own their own cooperage in Hungary, since the family is Hungarian, their heritage, and they have a cooperage in Tokaj. And, Hungarian oak to me is like the best of both worlds if you think of French oak and American oak, because it is gently spicy, has a more subtle presence than French oak does. And they use it in all their wines. And this particular wine is aged in a combination of 300-liter barrels and then one huge 3,000-liter barrel, all made from that particular kind of oak. Okay, so Madeline, take it away. What else can you tell us?
The two brothers are first generation Hungarian American because their father is a Hungarian native, and one of the brothers was actively involved in the privatization of business post Iron Curtain coming down in this region, and they do indeed have their own cooperage. They are pushing, I believe, if my stats are correct, over 1,000 wineries around the world that are using their oak. And what I found really cool about the presence of oak, both on their Cabernet Sauvignon, which Minor Pivot massively over delivers in terms of price point and concentration. Those of you who are pouring Cab by the glass, check it out. But the oak is very similar to French checklist of vanilla and baking spices, but quieter, and it integrates even when new just beautifully. So I can see why some wineries would like it. By the way, Obsidian itself in Lake County, I don't know if we mentioned it, Tim, but we're talking, they love to brag 1/2 mile high. So it's 2,600 feet above sea level, which is higher than any other vineyards in Napa further south, I believe.
Sure.
Tim, there's a question here about why old world wines have more earthiness and minerality. I think it's a great question.
Packer, my friend, you've asked a not so short question with a really long answer. So I have to be Inigo Montoya and sum up. Once upon a time, let's go back 20 years, maybe 30 years, when all three of us were studying for exams. Winemaking styles between European and non-European places, especially in California, they were pretty much different and set. And also, the climate in California is just being much warmer than what it was in Europe, especially in places like Bordeaux and Burgundy. In other words, you just get more fruit. And so if there was a sense of earthiness or mineral in a wine from Napa Valley, it was just going to be buried under a lot of fruit, and for that matter, oak, and the alcohol too, and the ripeness. Okay, so there's that. But the times have changed, and I think not only that, people are more attentive to their soils, the microbiome in the soils, and to me, that's responsible for what we call earth and mineral, and how the yeast in those soils impact fermentation. So I think you will see now more and more that wines from non-European type places, they show earth and mineral as well. So it's not such a blanket, 30,000 foot generalization anymore. It's, a thing of case by case, because there are certainly of long time wines like Australian Riesling that are profoundly mineral from New World countries. But I think more and more, there's more exceptions to the rule than generalizations.
Yeah, Tim, if I could just add too, and you're spot on in that, I would just add that at the time when people were sort of coming up with this sort of fairly straightforward, simplistic, put it in a box and put a bow around it thing, people were generally making wine in warmer places because they wanted their fruit to get ripe. And as such, when you get very ripe fruit, it will mitigate acidity, it will mitigate terroir and all that. And as over time, as new world places, quote unquote, have moved to cooler and cooler climates, the wines become much closer to their so-called European historic counterparts.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, absolutely. Anything else?
The question about off dry. Kevin said that this one he thought might be off dry, but is it because it's compared with the first two that were clearly very dry?
Take a look at my
I saw your answer, but I thought maybe Tim wants to
that's
on that.
Good point. Two thoughts come to mind. One, Lena, you're absolutely right, because especially number one I said was a laser beam, and it is bone dry, and this why by comparison it has like 100% more fruit, and is gentle and soft and malolactic. The lees, everything softens the finish, even though it's got elevated acidity. At the same time, really the true measure of any wine when you're tasting is the finish. Most of the taste receptors for sweetness are toward the front of your mouth, the tip of your tongue, etc. But those receptors are all over the place. But the true measure of sweetness or dryness in the wine is the finish. So pay attention to the finish and what you have after several sections. That will give you a really good measure. And there's the guys. There's Michael, Peter, and Arpad. And standing atop big chunks of obsidian. That's a great photograph. Yeah. And, if you put in new vineyards here, you need a bulldozer to move all that stuff. It's pretty crazy.
Okay. A sidebar about obsidian before we go to 4, it's actually, they have found arrowheads made out of it. So it's a very
right.
sharp rock,
Yeah, yeah.
volcanic in origin, and arrowheads going back, 1,000 years.
Yeah. One quick note, Veronica brings up a good point, ripeness versus residual sugar. So Veronica, just to say, remember, this is a function of yeast and fermentation. You can have really ripe fruit where you have the yeast that consume all the sugar and you have a wine that's dry, as opposed to, a wine with not even ripe fruit like Riesling from the Mosel Valley, where they stop the fermentation before the wine is completely dry and you have residual sugar. So just keep that in mind. But that's a great point you make. Okay. We are to wine number 4, the first of 3 red wines. Here are the questions I want you to think about. What does the wine's depth of color suggest about the possible grape variety? Thicker versus thinner skinned grape. And then here's that question again. What are the important non-fruit aromas and flavors to keep in mind? And finally, how would you describe the texture and the quality of the tannins in this particular wine? From the depth of color, you might have expectations and suspicions about how much tannin in the wine. So let's see if they play out. Okay, here we go. So visual aids, let's make sure I got this right. Everybody, hold up paper. Okay, so this wine has a lot of depth of color and you can't see through it. I'm going to call this a very deep ruby with purple because the edge or rim is definitely fuchsia or magenta, or it's pink purple. But the wine is very dense in color. And right away, I'm thinking about fruit qualities, maybe even structure levels, tannin levels, but we'll see because you can always be surprised. All right, let's move on to other things. Oh, on the nose. Okay, so there is a veritable cornucopia of different fruit. There's both red and black, maybe a little blue fruit, but it's predominantly red and black. So with red fruit, things like red plum, raspberry, there's definitely some sour cherry here, and there's some really ripe strawberry. So everything is fresh and ripe. There's something that's a little tart too, and I think this wine, like the previous wine, is going to tarten up on the palate. Black fruit too, but the black fruit too here has lift. So acidic black fruit like black raspberries and blackberries. And there's also, oddly enough, a little bit of what I would call sweet citrus. There's mandarin and tangerine, and that is fresh. It's almost like the peel. Reminds me of Constant Comment tea. The floral, there's some really pretty rose notes above the glass, maybe a little bit of lavender. And then the wine is, just a touch herbal. There's oregano and some thyme here. And a little bit of peppery, like paprika. And then there's both earth and mineral. So it's turned soil, like potting soil. And there's definitely some mineral. In terms of oak, if it's here, it's used or it's huge. Yeah, there's really practically no oak influence at all. Other things, I might take a look at the color and also the quality of the fruit being so forward and say, this may be whole cluster type fermentation, in which case, maybe there's some stems, we'll find out. Okay, on the palate. Okay, that's very curious. A wine with that much color, that much fruit, and I'm gonna jump to the structure. The alcohol is medium, maybe 13%. The acid, notice it's kind of flatlined. Your salivary glands taking a break. So the acid here is medium, between medium and medium plus, not quite medium plus. Okay, and then the tannins are MIA, right? Okay, and that's pretty strange, right? So taste it again. A lot of pretty fruit that turns tart like I thought it would. So now second sip, the acid is starting to creep up. It's medium plus. The tannin, though, stays at medium at best. And that's very curious. So that points me in a different direction in terms of what the grape could be. Okay. The finish is medium plus, and I would say the complexity is medium plus. It is dry. The texture is round. Not quite Hello Kitty, but it's close. It's really friendly. And, for someone who's just getting into red wine, this would be a perfect glass of red wine. Here you go. So we have some interesting choices here. Your choices are Gamay, which you might suspect for Beaujolais Village, Dolcetto from Piedmont and Northwest Italy, Pinot Noir from any number of different places that would give you the soft tannins. And your choices, France, of course, for Gamay and Beaujolais Village, and also Burgundy and Pinot Noir. Italy for Dolcetto. Argentina for, I'm not sure. And Oregon for, I think Pinot Noir, but also they grow Gamay as well. Okay. So those are, please cast a vote. And Maria says that you touched on the whole cluster. Yeah, I would say, Maria, good question. A whole cluster, probably the quality of the fruit. But what's missing to me, if it's there, it's really subtle. Is I was looking for green stem tannins, and they're really not there. So who knows? Yeah. All right.
Cool.
So
Let's see.
Meng, how are we doing on the casting of the ballots?
Well, we have 75% almost answered here. So I'd say pretty well, you guys. You guys got used to it by wine fork.
It's the red wine. People get excited again. They want to vote.
All right, let's see. I'm going to close the poll in just 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So I'm showing the results. Tim, I think you do need to help folks along here between the top 2 choices.
Yeah. Okay. So this one, but and I didn't say too much about the Gamay because it talked about leading the witnesses. This would have done it too much. Okay. So if it truly was Gamay, classic Gamay, especially with this fruit quality, and it was Beaujolais Village, I'd be looking for carbonic maceration and stem inclusion both. Okay. And also just higher acidity, but the carbonic, the candied fruit quality, the bubble gum, tutti frutti, Jolly Rancher, Hawaiian punch thing, and then stem tannins, and neither are there, right? And then Dolcetto, glad a lot of people went through it. Pinot Noir, I mean, this has even too much color for Pinot Noir. Yeah, unless you're blending something in with it, or from a warm climate, and the structure isn't there.
And Grenache too, right?
Well, Grenache too, and Grenache would have.
I mean, Gamay, sorry. Yeah,
Gamay. Yeah, Grenache, the alcohol would be much higher. Okay, all right.
And Tim, do you think that Maria's comment on drying tannins help you get to Italian?
Well, I have to say, Maria, this is kind of an exception to the rule with Italian wine and tannins, because usually Italian red grapes, they're all about tannin. Grape tannin in front of the mouth, oak tannin in the back, if it's oak is used. And this really has gentle tannins, which is why Dolcetto is called the little sweet one. Yeah. This differs from Barbera, by the way, because Barbera has higher acid, more tannin, and it's more savory. It's more herbal. But this is done in completely stainless steel, so there is no oak whatsoever. This goes to primary, and malolactic and stainless steel is on the lease for 3 months, and it is fine filtered and bottled. So it is just a wonderful expression. It's kind of like Piedmontese, Beaujolais, but without the carbonic. Yeah. Veronica says have been blousy. Well, Veronica, I agree, because once upon a time, that was the style. They were a little too ripe, a little too unwieldy, unbalanced, but this is the new style where stainless steel, earlier picking, and you get all this delightful fruit, but it's balanced. Yeah. All right. So let's see where we are. We hopped in the plane again, and another overnighter, more champagne required. And we're in a wonderful place, one of my favorite places, and that is Piedmont in Northwest Italy. And this is Luciano Sandrone in Alba. And certainly Sandrone, for a long time, since the late 70s, has been one of the top Barolo producers. His Canubi, Luciano's, was one of the first great Barolos I ever tried in the mid 80s, long time ago. Okay. Sadly, Luciano passed away last year in 2023. His daughter Barbara and granddaughter Alessia have taken over, and they make fantastic Barolo, and other wines too. This is their entry-level wine. It's delicious to me. It really is quintessential Dolcetto, at least in a modern style. So, thoughts, esteemed colleagues?
Maddie?
Oh no, beautifully. So I just think the quality of fruit on this is stunning. Absolutely stunning. But you described mouthfeel so well, and that's really the punchline with Dolcetto. The soft tannin, but prominent acidity. What's interesting to me about it is the color, and this is where color can set you free. If you were, toggling back and forth Pinot, Gamay, and Dolcetto, the other two are frankly thinner skinned and will be more see-through. And as simple as that may be, that can help you with deductive Riesling. Somebody asked the question, can you compare this to Sangiovese? And I gave it a crack in the chat room, Tim, speaking to the tannin structure with Sangiovese.
Yeah,
Unless you want to add
tannins,
something.
good point, Madeline. Yeah, the tannins are just going to be higher across the board, and the acid is going to be higher, and it's just going to be, it will be austere in comparison. And I didn't do my food pairings. I am remiss.
No, go for it.
Yes,
Okay, so with the white wine, with the Chardonnay, I made this last night for the first time. And if you're from upstate New York, you've heard of this. It's called Speedy chicken. You know Speedy? Yeah. So it's a marinade, I guess, from Binghamton, New York, which is near Finger Lakes, but not quite. And what it is, it's oil vinegar and basically what is powdered Italian dressing. So you've got onion powder, garlic powder, dried herbs, and MSG, and mixed together. And you know what? I have to say, it was delicious. I would have that with the Chardonnay. For this wine, I actually have some marinated beef kebabs tonight that I'm going to grill, and I think it would be perfect. So there you go.
Man, dinner at your house. That's awesome.
Awesome, Tim.
Arr.
Wonderful, and very, very, very summery fare. Don't the Sandronis? What a
Yeah, there
great
is the
family.
fantastic family. Yeah.
And Luciano may rest in peace.
Amen.
Thank you for that. I too, Tim, neglected to give you my food pairing on my Dog Point Sauvignon Blanc, although I did write it down. So I'm having to go back and look at my old notes. And I decided with summer here, I'm a big melon guy in the summer, but watermelon is my go-to in the summer. So I was thinking a salad of cubed watermelon with feta cheese. Pick up a little bit on that sort of element of Sauvignon Blanc that you find there. Maybe you could add a little bit of mint in there, up to you, maybe not. And if you didn't have access to feta and you didn't have access to herbs, but you really wanted to celebrate the summer because you were in stone fruit mode, watermelon and nectarine salad with a citrus dressing, and that wine would rock. All right, let's move on to wine 5. I want to save some time for Madeline. So we're going to take a quick look at this wine.
No more than 5 minutes or I get confused.
I know. We'll give you a little bit more than 5 minutes. So you've got a wine that's a little bit darker, although the last wine was pretty dark too. And this wine sort of counterintuitively, I would have thought I would have moved darker than not, but I didn't. Anyway, nevertheless, it is still a fairly deep color and deceptively opaque, deceptively ruby in nature with a very purpley edge. And that's something that I'm going to be thinking about because that purpley or bluer edge always suggests to me typically youthful fruit or high concentration. So right off the bat, that's kind of where I'm lending. It stains the glass. So I've got tears there, which is consistent with that higher level of concentration. Tearing is moderate. Yeah, moderate, maybe moderate plus, but more moderate. And then boom, let's go into the nose here. Right off the bat, and this is an interesting juxtaposition against the dolcetto that we just had. This wine has got a lot of fruit, but it's really more savory in expression than the wine is. So you have a combination of red and black fruit here. The red fruit is not what I would call sort of that sweet side of berried fruit like strawberries or raspberries, but more like the currant, more like plums, more even tomato-y or cherry tomato. Remember, tomato is a fruit. Anything with seeds is a fruit, right? And then you get this interesting savory thing. So you've got blackberry, a little bit of black cherry there, again, black plum, and then woof, all of a sudden everything else comes in. Following a nice whiff of violet, which is important, I think, contextually for this wine. I'm getting fennel and fennel seed. I'm getting rhubarb. I'm getting some black olive. I'm getting a little bit of that sort of underbrushy sort of character, a little bit of tea leaf, bit of pepper, more like green pepper corn than actual pepper itself, a little bit of smoked paprika or pimenton or something like that. There's something that suggests to me a presence of oak, maybe like cacao or cocoa powder, but it's not dominant here. This is an interesting tapestry, if you will, of savory red and black fruits, a lot of non-fruit, but again, sort of organic materials, and then just a kiss of oak, which again, I think echoes as much off that sort of smoked paprika, smoked pimenton character as anything else. Very interesting wine, very seductive wine. I mean, they keep coming back into the glass and trying to figure out what's going on here. I've got some definitive clues, but let's go ahead and taste first. The wine is dry, and it is very dry. In fact, it's a little bit astringent in context here. The flavors are fairly consistent with what I had before. Maybe there's a little bit more fruit pronounced in the palate than there is in the nose. The nose seems to be really dominated by that. There's a soft meatiness here that I wasn't picking up before. Madeline's kind of Jimmy Dean character, I think, definitely screams through here. Maybe even a little bit more like dry cured saucisson or saucisson sec. Again, there is an oak. There's a roundness to it here. I was actually expecting something a bit more austere in the palate, but the wine is definitely rounder by nature. There's definitely grip. There's tannin there, and the tannins, while present, are not hard, but they are a little bit astringent, which is quite curious there. The acid level is medium plus, pushing on the higher side, but at least medium plus. The alcohol is only moderate. I'm really surprised. I was expecting something a bit more generous. But the alcohol, my chest cavity is probably in the realm of 2% milk, maybe pushing whole milk. It's leaner and a little bit more tart, although there is a round element to it, but structurally, I think it's lean. And it's incredibly complex. The amount of stuff going on after you've swallowed it, after you've tried it, after you retronasal breathe back through your palate is quite interesting, quite compelling, and quite different. So I would say it does have red and black fruit here per our question. And I think that there is a suggestion of oak here, both texturally because of its roundness, but again, also because of some of that smoked pimenton and a little bit of that cacao powder and stuff like that. And there are interesting non-herbal and slightly vegetal things. Before I said that garrigue element, that little bit of licorice element in there. Very interesting wine. Very, to use a Madeline word, very compelling wine. A lot going on here. So let's see where we could possibly be in terms of grape varieties and geographical associations here. We could have Corvina or Corvina as a blend. Corvina, for those of you who are scratching your head going, is that like related to Hammurabi Zuri? No, we are actually, it could be a car. Hey, have you got the new Corvinas are on the market right now? No, but this is actually the grape type that you would associate with the area of Valpolicella and Amarone and that part of the world, oftentimes made into a Valpolicella or Amarone, especially when blended with Corvina, Molinara, and Rondinella, which sounds like a law firm, doesn't it? Your favorite injury lawyers, Corvina, Rondinella, and Molinara. Now, then we have Malbec or Malbec blend, usually deeply colored, focused on Argentine, but don't forget our friends in Cahors. They make it a little bit leaner and meaner and harder. Syrah or Syrah blend. Think about what you know about Syrah wines and Shiraz wines around the world and other. Now, where could we be within our Europe options? We could be Italy, certainly for the law firm of Corvina, Rondinella, and Molinara. There's a little bit of Syrah there too, not much Malbec, and of course others. France could be Malbec and it could be Syrah blended or in pure forms. Again, anytime we hit something with a slash blend means that it could either be pure play or it could be blend. But as I taste this wine, doesn't come off to me as sort of a soloist and a choir. It comes off like a choir, right? So we do that. And then Argentina, of course, led by Malbec, but they make a little bit of Syrah as well too, oftentimes blended together. California playing every single card at the table because, well, we're California, we do whatever we want. So think about that. If there's a varietal or genre of wine that's not on the list, punch other, pop it in there, and we can talk about it.
Great.
Lee,
so we have,
yeah.
I don't think we have a lot of questions right now. People are thinking that
Voting.
there is a voting is really good.
Excellent.
So
vote early, vote often.
I'm going to close the vote. I'm going to close the poll down so that Madeline can have time. Here's where we are. We are at 12% Corvina, 35% Malbec, and 53% Syrah.
Yeah, there's a lot of Syrah clues here, particularly French Syrah, and particularly northern French Syrah. If you spend any time around Creuse or Saint Joseph and things like that, there are definitely Malbecian clears here too. That sort of very strong, dark fruited character. Certainly the color and the violet character. That's usually to me a bird dog from Malbec. Corvina, not so much. And then for those of you who were playing in that world, you were bouncing back and forth. Probably if you were in the Malbec world, you were maybe bouncing to Argentina or Syrah back and forth, but maybe you were playing both. If you were voting safe, vote California. So let's see where we actually are here.
So it's between Syrah or Malbec, France and Argentina is what people are voting.
Yeah.
Okay,
and
let's
what I
see.
think is going to be interesting when we get in the plane here and we're hopping back on board. We're leaving Italy. I'm finishing by having a white night in a Piemontese Tavolata, having a little bit too much salumi, a lot of wine, going for my dolcetto, a couple of old vintages of Barolo, hungover, hopping on the plane, not realizing what a long flight I am about to make because I was thinking that perhaps I would be heading off to France and thinking that based on this wine, it was going to be a short trip and I would end up in the northern Rhone Valley, only to find out that the plane didn't stop. And it kept going and going and going and going and going until I ended up in Argentina. But not just your typical spot of Argentina, because I think most people would be thinking that you'd be going to Mendoza, but you're actually in one of the most majestic and beautiful and exotic and isolated spots there, which is the mountain range, which you can see in the background of the Quebrada de Humahuaca, which we'll get there in a minute. But we are actually in the northern province of Jujuy, spelled Juy Juy, Juy, Juy. And you are literally upwards towards the border there. And if you just move north to where the A is on the left-hand side there, right-hand side rather, you're in Bolivia. So you are literally adjacent to Bolivia. You are north of Salta, north of Calchaquías, north of all of those areas, up into the area of Jujuy. Now, this is an area that has traditional wine growing and winemaking. It's in fact a UNESCO World Heritage Site, back celebrating the wine culture of a long time ago, much of which actually used to go before they had borders over the border of Bolivia and got distilled out as Singani. But this is wine country today. And it is north of Salta, as I said before. It is considered to be the wild, wild north of Argentina these days. You're hundreds of miles north of Mendoza. It is a very interesting area here, and we are literally lining an area called the Quebrada. Quebrada means a ravine, right? So it's the ravine of Humahuaca. And if you've ever seen pictures of Humahuaca, there are these beautiful, Google it when you get a minute, these beautiful pasteled mountains, fake. I mean, they're not literally multicolored the way these are, but imagine less different colors, more browns and yellows and beiges, but something that literally carries this sort of pastiche of colors across the board. And that's what Humahuaca is. Are you ready, guys? Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? You're at 8,700 feet above sea level. 8,700 feet above sea level. So we talk about California, 1,000 feet, 1,800 feet. This is truly high desert wine. You are so north and so high that one of the things they actually worry about is it getting warm enough for the fruit to actually get ripe. So you have this interesting phenomenon is that you are so high that you get massive UV, right? So you're getting things that are actually ripening the skins, but the season is incredibly long because the diurnal exchange is so cool and so cold that people call it hellishly cold up in this part of the world. It is a freak of nature. Malbec is the grape of choice, but in this particular wine, and oftentimes the case, they have found that the grape that matches best with Malbec up here is, are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? Syrah. So this wine is 80% Malbec. It is 13% Syrah, which is giving you that northern Rhone element there. And then the balance, there's just a kiss of Cabernet Sauvignon in the wine to sort of round things out. This wine is a joint project between a gentleman named Alejandro Sejanovic, who works for the company called Manos Negras or Black Hands. He works with Jeff Mosbach, the two of them being ex-Catena alumni and incredibly successful. But Alejandro's partner in this is another Alejandro named Nieva, whose property it is, and they planted it together. It's relatively recent. It only goes back about 30 or 40 years. It is 100% irrigated. You kind of have to be up in this part of the world, and just a unique animal. It is this combination of incredibly harsh sun and UV coupled with very cool climate and very high altitude. It is a, no pun intended, freak of nature, but aren't we lucky for doing it? Now, before you get way too excited about this wine, I will tell you that they don't make that much of it. There's just a few hundred cases. You will have to dig around on Wine Searcher and places to find it because you're not going to find it at Total Wine or Safeway or Albertsons or whatever. But it is definitely, I think you'll believe, worth the thing. And given the prices of really high-end Northern Rhone wines today, this is a relative bargain. That's
Okay.
Alejandro. Quick note there, Lee Mang. They call him Colo. You know what Colo is short for in colloquial Spanish Argentinian? Redhead. So that is Kolo. We call him Kolo Sejanovic, and he is the winemaker partner in this wine.
Evan, so 53% of the people picked Syrah, and there is some Syrah, but to be fair, how would you have distinguished the Malbec from the Syrah? What pointed to the Malbec more distinctly?
The color. You're not going to get that level of color in Syrah. And then what you're getting here is that if anything, the Syrah is bringing out, there's a lot of personality, but cool climate Malbec. And you will find this in Salta. If you've had any Salteño Malbecs, they are extremely peppery and extremely Rhone-like. And interestingly enough, very low Patagonian, closer to the ocean, wines closer to the water are also cooler climate, different season, shorter growing season because of the latitude are there. So northern Argentina, southern Argentina, and the northern Rhone all show a lot in common, but it is that combination of florality, that violet character, the density of color, and the softness of the tannins.
The tannins, again, those I was gonna jump in and say that's Malbec.
Yeah,
you know, not to get too lost in the rabbit holes of all the other details, but if your takeaway wants to be the varietal, it's there.
Yeah, and that keen sense of the obvious is why we love Madeline, but in the end, probably that is the biggest bird dog. She got to it first, I got to it last, and I'm going to give her 10 minutes on wine number 6, but my food rack. I want my food rack.
Yes.
I spend a lot of time grilling anything fleshy in the middle of summer, and anything fleshy and meating, be it a lamb chop, be it a good steak, or be it a nice range of sausages or whatever, mixed grill is going to rock and roll with this wine, particularly if you take something like rosemary, which I have in my yard, and actually pull the branches, put olive oil on it, baste with that, and then throw that in the fire as well. It's going to be awesome.
So Maddie, it's on to you, but I do want to point out that Evan, the person that is after your heart with descriptors today is our starfruit lady, Maria, with this chewable multivite flavor comment that you'll have to read in the chat. I love it.
I look forward to that, Maria. Thank you for being on it with all these beautiful descriptors today.
All right, Maddie, you're on. Number 6.
Well, 2 things I got to tell you. Kolo in Greek does not mean redhead. It means, just to lighten everything, it means rear end. I just would be careful about saying that to him without totally cracking up. And I want to add a food, you know, for those of you who are vegetarian, you know what occurs to me with this wine is something really deep and rich like makhni dal. Are you guys hip to Indian food where you have really dark lentils? And they end up very creamy, but very rich flavor that will just love a wine like this. They'd melt into one another. So, okie dokie, 10 minutes. What to do with it? Yay. I'm usually the caboose. So what are we looking at here? And by the way, your enthusiasm for this wine is eloquent, Evan, and wildly deserved because it's really neat. You know, what did we say? 8,000 feet above sea level? We're talking nosebleed. Yes, right. The questions. Qualifying the tannins. So you can say medium plus, you can say high, but are they finely grained? Are they smooth? Are they edgy? Are they mean? Are they drying? What are they? Because that'll help with deductive reasoning also. Primary non-fruit aromas. We just seem to be stuck on that today. So that said, has this wine enjoyed any bottle age? And if it has, what is the tell or tells that it has? Meaning, was it born yesterday? Hi, I was just released, but haven't been hanging out in a nice, cool area for a while. So that said, the color, yay. And this is where I just get totally fascinated by red color. I love it because if you look at this, the center is a true deep ruby red. Almost opaque, not quite, but let your eye follow the center to the very rim, and towards the rim within half an inch, you get 2 or 3 different hues. So there is gradation of color, which finishes with the teeniest little bit of yellow in the rim, which can signify either bottle age and or, barrel age and or a couple specific grape varieties that fake us out and do that even when they're young and drive blind tasting candidates nuts. So in terms of stain, you know, it's significant. So we're not talking thin-skinned grape variety or varieties. And I bring that up, not leading, but just considering that often reds are blends. They're not necessarily monovarietals, and to hold that thought, and that will add to the complexity factor. So aromatically, I'm laughing because I got to tell you, I was suppressing a laugh earlier smelling it. It knocks me out. And what knocks me out is it is so complex, it is so integrated, but it's also defined like it's an accordion immediately opening up fruit, earth, wood, herbs, animals, spice, you know, and on and on. And a little bit of what we call a developing smell. You know, a touch of vinosity as opposed to fruitiness that it wouldn't have had without some age. So let me gather my enthusiasm for a minute and be slightly more disciplined about this. But in terms of the specifics of the fruit, it is perfectly ripe. Berries, I think red berries lead, red currant, also red plum. So to Tim's point, Tim made a very important distinction earlier between you're talking about any kind of fruit. When you're talking about tart red fruits, raspberry comes to mind, even tartar red fruits, let's see if they're red, pomegranate and such comes to mind. This isn't so much tart as it is, you know, currant, plum, red, a little bit of blueberry, like super ripe blueberries. I'm from Michigan, this is the time of year. And then black fruit, also black currant, cassis, black plum. A variety of berry fruit and plums with red fruit leading, just perfectly ripe, not verging into overripe. There is a floral element to this wine that's beautiful. And to me, it's more dried, like potpourri-esque. That's just a perfect seasoning. It's not excessive. It doesn't drive the wine the way it does in Malbec quite often. There is an herbal tone to it that's mostly both fresh and dried herbs, but I'd say leaf, tea leaf, tobacco leaf is important in this wine, and it adds significant complexity. There's both grape and oak spice in this wine, and the oak spice is in the incarnation of, you know, cardamom, allspice, a little bit of cinnamon, not too sweet. Then there is a lot of organic earth on this wine. You know, whether you want to call it turned dirt, potting soil, truffle, mushroom, forest floor, and it's just great. Again, adding big time to the complexity. Leather, which some of you might be going, Britannomyces. It could be, but I just think it's more like a perfectly really expensive Coach bag, you know, or expensive Italian shoes, that smell. Or if you get to ride in somebody's really expensive sports car, those leather seats, that smell. And then inorganically, I get sort of a graphite lead pencil. I still have a pencil sharpener. I still buy soft pencils and sharpen them because I love the whole action of like erasing. I could go on and on. Oh, oak, you know, it's there. It's not hiding, but it certainly doesn't command attention. And it's the last thing I mentioned. So it's a beautiful use of oak, which is, you know, not dominant. We're not talking about all new French oak barrels. I haven't even tasted it. So let me see if all of that stuff appears while you guys consider the options here. Very interesting. Absolutely complex, but a little bit tighter. And as a general, I wouldn't say rule, but phenomenon with red wines of this kind, the nose will tend to start showing maturation and layers earlier than the palate and the finish will. And I think that's true in this particular case. Also on the palate, I think the black fruit starts to dominate a little bit more. The acidity is coming up higher than I thought it would be. It's medium plus. The tannins are medium plus, and they are, I wouldn't call them soft, but I would call them well-mannered. You know, they're definitely drying, but they don't shut the flavor of the wine down. They're not hard. Pretty much everything I mentioned on the nose is reflected on the palate with both black and red fruit and a little bit of blue. And maybe a little bit more inorganic minerality on the palate than organic. It's very high quality wine. That to me is showing a little bit of bottle age, notably in the color and on the nose. The finish is long but textural. The flavors stop a little bit midway through, and I think it's simply its youth. I bet, you know, my food before we even reveal it, I was gonna say lamb chop because I'm Greek, but Evan got that. I'm going to say baba ganoush, you know, really good smoked eggplant with a little bit of tahini and, you know, olive oil. Fabulous with this. So what do we have? Grenache,
Great call.
Tannat, Merlot. And I don't need anything fancy. Just give me, you know, half a loaf of sourdough and leave me alone, you know, and I'll just polish off the baba ganoush. Grenache, just consider, go back to color again. You know, Grenache, unless it's been blended with Syrah and Mourvedre and other stuff, which it often is, can appear closer to Pinot or Gamay in color. So FYI. And tends to have more of a sort of peppery element to it. Tannat can definitely be grippy and dark fruited and structured. And Merlot, you know, is not namby-pamby, particularly if it's in a blend with Cabernet Sauvignon and other grapes. Merlot can have structure, but generally speaking, the tannins are a little bit softer and the fruit is more red fruited than black. And I'm generalizing. Spain for Garnacha, France for Grenache, Tannat and Merlot, Australia for Grenache for sure, and Uruguay for Tannat. I haven't been there, Evan. And you invited me, so I can't complain about it. I by now
All
have
right.
a window seat in business class because I've taken a nap. Where are we going, Limang?
So I'm just going to share the results very quickly. We have 10% in Grenache, 35% in Tannat, and 55% in Merlot. And then we are at 80% in France and 20% in Uruguay. No takers for Spain or Australia. So I don't know if you want to talk that through as we go.
The only thing I will say, because we're going to reveal it, I really think this wine is memorizable. I think when we see it revealed, this is whether you want to memorize the nose, the palate, the structure, the whole thing. This tells you what it is. And we are crossing the ocean again. A lot of long flights today, man. Don't eat all of the cheese plates. I want one too. We are going to France. We are going to Bordeaux. We're not going to the right bank. Though this is Merlot dominant, it is officially hold the boat. 65 Merlot, 35 Cabernet Sauvignon. But again, Cabernet is the elephant in the room always. This is left bank, but south of Bordeaux. This is Grave. This is not Pessac. This is very interesting. This is an estate that's just east of Barzac in Grave. So Grave being a large area, about what, 35 miles long south of Bordeaux. And in 1987, the year we took the MS exam, Evan, they came out with the separate appellation of Pessac-Léognan, the northern slice of the original Grave. I think are we still in, it looked like we were still in north of Salta. So there we are. And what to tell you about this particular producer. This owner was born in Périgord, so make of that what you will, which is, you know, satellite to Bordeaux. He's a retired architect or architect industry. 2018, not not old, but certainly enough time to develop some venacity. And 2018 is a spectacular year, along with 19. We've had a string of great vintages in Bordeaux. There's the view. It's not as populated as it would be were you in a little bit further north in Pessac or the Médoc. And, you know, so we can move on to our, this is the guy, isn't he handsome? The Frenchman who was in architecture before he decided
Looks like
to,
an architect.
yeah, very, very, very nice looking Frenchman who decided to resuscitate this estate. It should be said about Grave, which has sort of lost a little PR ground because of Pessac, that it offers us both white wines and red wines of quality and tends to have better value than Pessac further north. And Thomas Jefferson, who trolled around Europe, noted in the late 18th century that Grave wines were considered the finest Bordeaux has to offer, which is probably contributed to Haut-Brion getting its rep. I honestly think, say what you will, if you can just meditate a little bit for 24 hours on this particular wine, it's a great example of Bordeaux with a little bit of bottle age, and Merlot dominant here. Cab comes up more on the palate, but Bordeaux.